Hello and welcome to Fireside History. Today we explore a chilling question that has haunted America for centuries. In 1587, a fledgling English colony of 117 people was simply erased from the map. They were pioneers, families with children, seeking a new life. Their settlement was found abandoned, their homes empty, their fires cold. The only clue left behind was a single cryptic word carved into a tree: Croatoan. Among the lost was Virginia Dare, a newborn baby, the first English child of this new world. What happened to them? Let's start with today's story. The story of that vanished colony doesn't begin in the forests of America. It starts in the glittering, paranoid court of Queen Elizabeth I, with a serious case of national envy. In the late 16th century, England was an ambitious but scrappy island nation. It watched as its arch-rival Catholic Spain became obscenely wealthy from the gold and silver pouring out of its American colonies. Imagine Spanish galleons, loaded to the brim with treasure, sailing across the Atlantic. For England, this was more than just frustrating. It was a direct threat. Spain's wealth funded massive armies and fleets, instruments of its powerful Catholic empire. Elizabeth, a Protestant queen in a continent of religious turmoil, knew she had to counter this. But how could her kingdom compete? Enter Sir Walter Raleigh. He was a quintessential Elizabethan courtier, a dashing soldier, poet, and explorer with a talent for self-promotion. He approached the Queen not just with a problem, but with a daring solution. He argued that England needed its own foothold in the New World. It was time to stop watching Spain and start competing. Raleigh's plan was brilliantly simple and incredibly audacious. An English colony in America could serve multiple purposes. It could be a source of valuable resources like timber and precious metals. More importantly, it could act as a base for privateers. These were essentially state-sanctioned pirates who could legally raid those treasure-laden Spanish ships. It was a high-risk, high-reward strategy. The idea was too tempting to ignore. In 1584, Queen Elizabeth granted Raleigh a royal charter. It gave him the right to explore and colonize any lands not already claimed by a Christian prince. This piece of paper was a declaration of intent. It was England's official entry into the race for the New World. A race fueled by greed, faith, and strategy, which would ultimately lead those settlers to Roanoke Island. With the Queen's blessing secured, Walter Raleigh didn't waste a moment. He needed to find the perfect spot for his American base, and he needed to do it fast. In April 1584, he dispatched 2 ships under the command of Philip Armada and Arthur Barlow. Their mission was straightforward: scout the coast and find a suitable location for a colony. After a long voyage, they landed on the outer banks of what is now North Carolina. What they found seemed to be a dream. The air was sweet with the smell of flowers and grapes. The forests were full of game, and the waters teemed with fish. Barlow later wrote that the coast was so full of grapes, as the very beating and surge of the sea overflowed them. It sounded less like a military report and more like a travel brochure. Their first encounter with the native people was just as idyllic. The local Secotán and Croatoan peoples greeted the Englishmen, not with suspicion, but with generosity and curiosity. They were welcomed into villages, offered food, and treated as honored guests. This was not the dangerous wilderness they might have expected. This felt like a Garden of Eden. To truly understand this new world, Armada and Barlow convinced 2 native men to return to England with them. Their names were Manteo from the Croatoan tribe and Wanchesi from the Secotán. They would serve as living proof of the friendly locals. More practically, they would learn English and act as interpreters for future expedition. It was a brilliant move for Raleigh's public relations campaign. When the expedition returned to England, Arthur Barlow presented his report. He painted a picture of a fertile paradise inhabited by gentle, trusting people. The land was supposedly ripe for the taking, with minimal effort required. He even described the natives as living after the manner of the Golden Age. This was exactly what Raleigh and his investors wanted to hear. The report sealed the deal. Roanoke Island was chosen. The dream of an English America was about to begin, based on a dangerously perfect first impression. Raleigh's next expedition in 1585 was no diplomatic mission. The idyllic reports of a golden age were set aside for cold military reality. This was an invasion force. It was made up of 107 soldiers, men hardened by wars in Europe. They were led by Governor Ralph Lane and the fleet commander Sir Richard Grenville, two men who understood discipline and force far better than cultural exchange. Their goal was simple: build a fort and start harassing Spanish shipping. The paradise promised in earlier reports quickly revealed its harsher side. The relationship between the English and the natives began to fray almost immediately over something trivial. A single silver cup went missing. The English accused a nearby village of the theft. When it wasn't returned, Grenville's response was swift and brutal. He ordered the entire village and its precious cornfields burned to the ground for a simple cup. After this display of force, Grenville sailed off to hunt for Spanish treasure, leaving Ralph Lane in charge. Lane was a professional soldier, and his mind was wired for conflict. He grew deeply paranoid of the local Secretan chief, Wingina. He became utterly convinced that the surrounding tribes were secretly plotting to overwhelm and destroy his garrison. Was a native attack truly imminent? Lane decided not to wait to find out. He chose a preemptive strike rooted in betrayal. He invited Wingina and his advisors to a meeting, supposedly to discuss peace. As the native leaders gathered, Lane gave a prearranged signal. His men opened fire, murdering the chief and his council. Any chance of peaceful coexistence was now gone, destroyed by English paranoia and violence. The colony was now completely isolated. Their food was gone, and they were surrounded by rightfully enraged natives. Their situation was hopeless. Then in June 1586, salvation appeared on the horizon. It was the fleet of Sir Francis Drake, stopping by on his way back to England from raiding the Spanish. Seeing the desperate state of the colonists, Drake offered them passage home. They abandoned the fort without a second thought. They left behind a legacy of bloodshed and betrayal. The ground was now poisoned for anyone who dared to follow. The fleet of 3 ships set sail from England in May 1587. The mood on board was entirely different from the previous military venture. This was a vessel of hope, carrying families who dreamed of fertile land and a new beginning. They were investors in their own future, not just soldiers following orders. Their destination was clear in their minds. They were heading for the green shores of the Chesapeake Bay. But a governor on land is very different from a governor at sea. On the waves, the real power belonged to the fleet's pilot, a man named Simon Fernandez. He was a highly experienced Portuguese navigator who knew these Atlantic routes better than anyone. He was also notoriously headstrong and had his own priorities, which did not always align with building a quiet farming community. The plan, as authorized by Raleigh, was simple. They would make a brief stop at Roanoke Island. Their only business there was to check on a small holding force left behind by Sir Richard Grenville a year earlier. After that, they were to immediately proceed north to their intended settlement site in the Chesapeake. Governor White's orders were explicit. But when the ships anchored off the Outer Banks in late July, Fernandez refused to go any further. He argued that the summer was nearly over. He claimed it was too dangerous to try and find a suitable harbor in the Chesapeake so late in the season. He effectively gave the colonists an ultimatum: get off here at Roanoke or risk being taken back to England. You can picture the shock and anger. John White argued, pleaded, and likely threatened, but it was useless. Fernandez controlled the ship. The colonists, including White's own pregnant daughter, were forced to disembark on the one place they were meant to avoid. Their carefully crafted plan for a fresh start was wrecked before they even hammered a single nail. They were now stranded on an island poisoned by a history of violence and mistrust. Their feet hit the sand of Roanoke, not the fertile soil of the Chesapeake. The colonists, a mix of hopeful families and weary craftsmen, watched as their ships became specks on the horizon. Their meticulously planned future had been hijacked by a stubborn pilot. They were stranded not just geographically, but in a nightmare they were supposed to avoid. This was not a fresh start. It was a return to a place haunted by failure. Their first priority was grimly practical. They had to find the 15 men left behind by Sir Richard Grenville's supply ship a year earlier. Governor White led a search party to the old settlement site. What they found was a scene of desolation. The fort was razed. The houses were overgrown with melon vines and weeds. And there, scattered on the ground, were the sun-bleached bones of a single Englishman. It was a chilling welcome. There was no time for despair. The colonists, including women and children, set to work with a desperate energy. They began repairing the dilapidated cottages left by Ralph Lane's soldiers. Imagine the feeling of hammering nails into the very structures abandoned by a failed mission, while the ghost of its violent past hung in the air. This was supposed to be the city of Raleigh, but it felt more like a graveyard. Their only bridge to this hostile world was Manteo, their Croatoan ally. He was their guide, translator, and best hope for survival. He immediately set out to make contact with his people and to understand what had happened to the 15 men. The colonists learned the grim truth. The men had been attacked by warriors from the Croatoan tribe, the very people Ralph Lane had antagonized. The situation was now terrifyingly clear. They were in the wrong place. They were surrounded by natives who had every reason to hate them. Their supplies were limited, and their connection to England had just sailed away. The dream of a new life had curdled into an immediate struggle for survival. The air in the rebuilt cottages was thick with a quiet dread. The discovery of the skeleton was a constant, grim reminder of what could happen here. Every rustle in the woods, every unfamiliar bird call, sent shivers down their spine. The colonists knew they were unwelcome guests. They were living on land stained by the memory of Ralph Lane's violence. This wasn't the fresh start they had been promised. It was a daily struggle against fear. That fear soon found its face. A colonist named George Howe decided to go crabbing alone, a simple act to find food. He waded into the calm waters of the Sound, a solitary figure against the vast wilderness. Without warning, the silence was shattered by the hiss of arrows. Warriors from the Croatoan tribe, hidden among the trees, unleashed a deadly volley. Later, his body was recovered from the shallows. It was riddled with 16 arrows. The message was unmistakable. A wave of pure terror washed over the settlement. They were isolated, their supplies were finite, and a hostile force now surrounded them. What could they possibly do? Their survival depended entirely on their Croatoan ally, Manteo. He was their only bridge to the native world, their only hope of avoiding total annihilation. Governor White sent him immediately to his people on Croatoan Island. Manteo had the impossible task of explaining that these English were not the same as the brutal soldiers from before. Amazingly, Manteo succeeded. The Croatoan people, longtime rivals of the Croatoan, agreed to help the colonists. To formalize this fragile and absolutely vital alliance, the English did something characteristically formal. On August 13, 1587, in a small ceremony, Manteo was baptized into the Church of England. Following instructions from Raleigh, White also bestowed upon him a grand title. He was now Lord of Roanoke and Dasamongepunk. You can imagine the scene. A European title bestowed in a makeshift settlement upon a native man who was now their sole protector. It was a desperate attempt to create a sense of control in a situation that was spiraling into chaos. They had secured one powerful friend, but everyone knew the Secretan were still out there, watching from the forest, their anger far from satisfied. The immediate aftermath of Virginia Dare's birth, on that August 18, 1587, shifted the colony's anxieties into stark human terms. For Eleanor and Ananias Dare, their baby girl was a miracle in a nightmare. But for Governor John White, the tiny infant represented an almost unbearable weight. His granddaughter was now living proof of their desperate situation, a fragile life demanding protection in a world determined to reject them. The collective fear in the settlement found a new focus. No longer just worried about themselves, the colonists now looked at Virginia and saw their own children, their own vulnerability. This was no longer just about establishing a foothold for England. This was about simple survival, about keeping a tiny human being alive in an increasingly hostile environment. They had witnessed the gruesome murder of George Howe, the discovery of a skeleton, and felt the constant threat of the Secretan. The colony's supplies, already stretched thin, were now dwindling faster with a new mouth to feed, however small. The journey to England for provisions, once a possibility, became an absolute necessity. Everyone understood it. They were trapped on Roanoke Island, thanks to the pilot Simon Fernandez, with dwindling resources and no way to signal their desperate plight across the vast ocean. The colonists began to plead with John White. You can imagine the scene, the hushed conversations, the desperate eyes turning to their governor. They insisted he must go, that he was their only hope. They needed tools, food, and reinforcements. But most of all, they needed someone to break through their isolation. The fate of 117 souls, including his own daughter and newborn granddaughter, rested on his shoulders. White was an artist, not a politician. He was a grandfather, not a soldier. Yet, he was the only one with the influence and experience to undertake such a perilous journey. He knew it meant leaving his family behind in a place already stained with English blood. But the choice was made for him by the desperate faces of his colonists and by the soft cries of his granddaughter. He had to go. The joy surrounding Virginia Dare's birth was short-lived. It quickly gave way to a cold, hard calculation. With each passing day, their food supplies dwindled, and the threat from the surrounding forest felt more real. The colonists knew their survival depended on a lifeline to England, and they had only one person who could possibly secure it. They turned to Governor John White. You can picture their desperate plea. A delegation of settlers approaching him, their faces etched with worry. They argued that he was their only hope. He was the governor. He knew Walter Raleigh. He could make the court in London understand their dire situation. At first, White refused outright. The idea was unthinkable. How could he abandon his daughter, his son-in-law, and his newborn granddaughter in this dangerous place? He argued that his departure would look like he was fleeing his responsibilities. But the colonists were relentless. They even put their request in writing, absolving him of any blame and formally appointing him their representative. They weren't asking him to desert them. They were asking him to save them. Finally, overwhelmed by their logic and his own fears for his family, White agreed. He made a solemn promise. He would sail to England, gather the necessary supplies and reinforcements, and return by the following spring of 1588. Before he left, they devised a simple but ingenious plan. If the colonists were forced to move from Roanoke Island for any reason, they would carve their new location into a prominent tree or post. And if they had to leave in a hurry, under duress, or in danger, they would add one crucial detail. They would carve a Maltese cross above the name of their destination. This secret token would tell White if they had left peacefully or if disaster had struck. John White sailed from Roanoke with a solemn promise. He would be back by the spring of 1588, with all the supplies his family and colonists needed. He had sailed directly into a geopolitical hurricane he could not have possibly foreseen. His timing was, to put it mildly, catastrophic. While White was crossing the Atlantic, King Philip II of Spain was finalizing his grand plan for England. He assembled what he called the Invincible Armada. It was the largest naval force the world had ever seen. Modern historians speak of around 130 massive warships, crewed and armed by almost 30,000 men. Their objective was brutally simple. They would invade and conquer Protestant England, returning it to Catholic rule by force. When news of the approaching fleet reached London, it triggered a national panic. Queen Elizabeth I ordered a total mobilization of the rep. Every single seaworthy vessel was commandeered for national defense. Merchant ship, fishing boats, and privateer vessels were all pressed into service under the command of men like Sir Francis Drake. England was fighting for its very survival. You can picture John White arriving in a country frantically preparing for invasion. A lone governor, trying to charter a ship to carry tools and food to a tiny, distant colony. His pleas were not just ignored, they were irrelevant. While he worried about his granddaughter, the entire nation worried about Spanish soldiers marching through the streets of London. No ship, no sailor, no barrel of gunpowder could be spared for a forgotten settlement across the ocean. The spring of 1588 came and went. The summer followed, bringing with it the epic naval battles that would decide England's fate. On the shores of Roanoke, 117 people scanned the empty horizon. They were waiting for a sail that would never appear. Their lifeline to home had not just been delayed. It had been completely severed by the fury of an imperial war. The first year without John White must have been a slow-motion catastrophe. Their English identity began to fray, thread by thread. The metal saws and axes, symbols of their supposed superiority, grew dull and then broke. There was no blacksmith to reforge them. The vibrant woolen clothes that marked them as English rotted in the humid air, replaced by deerskin if they were lucky, or simple rags if they were not. Survival forced them to shed their old selves. Ananias Dare, a man skilled in the precise art of London bricklaying, now had to learn the alien craft of building a fishing weir. The women, who knew the rhythms of an English garden, had to master the cultivation of maize and squash, their hands becoming calloused in unfamiliar ways. They were no longer colonists imposing their will on the land. They were becoming part of it, against their will. Their social structure would have fractured. With Governor White gone, who was in charge? Was it a council of the senior men? Or did a new leader emerge, someone better adapted to this new world? Factions likely formed. One group might have argued for staying put, clinging to the hope of an English ship. Another, more pragmatic, would have pushed for full integration with the Croatoan, even if it meant abandoning their culture and faith. This division would have come to a head with a simple question: where do we go? The settlement was failing, the soil was exhausted, and the danger from the Croatoan never faded. Some might have argued for moving south to Croatoan Island, a place of relative safety among allies. Others, perhaps remembering the original plan, may have looked north toward the Chesapeake. A desperate, long-shot gamble to find a better land on their own. The final choice they made was their last message to the world. The silence was the first thing that felt wrong. It was a heavy, unnatural quiet, broken only by the chirping of insects and the distant crash of waves. The false hope of the forest fire had died, leaving John White and his small landing party in the oppressive darkness of the Roanoke shore. They moved cautiously up the sandy bluff, their lanterns casting long, dancing shadows among the trees. The air was thick with humidity and dread. They reached the perimeter of the settlement. A high palisade, a sturdy defensive fence made of tree trunks, now enclosed the site. This was new. The colonists had clearly felt threatened enough to build it. Pushing through the entrance, they found not chaos, but an eerie sense of order. The small cottages stood intact, but they were empty, as if their occupants had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. Weeds were already beginning to reclaim the paths. There were no bodies, no scorch marks from a battle, no signs of a frantic struggle. It was a ghost town, a place abandoned with a strange deliberateness. White's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of terror for his family and a sliver of hope that they had simply relocated. He called out their names into the night, but only the echo of his own voice answered. Then one of his men lifted a lantern. There, carved deep into one of the main posts of the palisade, was a single clear word in capital letters: Croatoan. White's eyes scanned the wood frantically. He remembered their agreement, the secret signal. If they had been forced to leave in distress, they were to carve a Maltese cross above their destination. There was no cross. Nearby, on another tree, they found 3 more letters: Crow, as if the carver had been interrupted. The message was clear, yet deeply unsettling. They had left. They had gone to Croatoan, the island home of their ally, Manteo, and according to their own code, they had left peacefully. But where were they now? A small aside. If you are enjoying this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. You will help us a lot to continue making more content like this. Truly, even though it's a simple click, it's the motivation we have to continue sharing history. Thank you. The scene that greeted John White was not one of violent destruction. It was something far stranger. It was a scene of meticulous deconstruction. The houses had not been burned or torn down in a rage. According to White's own account, they had been taken down. Their belongings, their boats, and even heavy iron shot had been carefully removed and taken with them. This was not the work of a raiding party. For a group of people who had vanished off the face of the earth, they had been remarkably tidy. There were no skeletons hidden in the weeds. There were no signs of a struggle, no bloodstains on the earth. It was as if 117 people had simply packed up their entire town and moved on. The high palisade fence they had built for protection stood undamaged, a silent testament to the fear they must have felt before their departure. Then there was the clue itself. Croatoan? The letters were carved cleanly, without haste, into a main post at the entrance. White knew exactly what it meant. It was the name of the island just to the south, modern-day Hatteras. More importantly, it was the home of his ally Manteo and the friendly Croatoan people. The unfinished carving of crow on another tree seemed to confirm it, as if they started the message there before choosing a more prominent spot. This knowledge must have filled him with a surge of hope, but he had to be sure. He searched the posts, his heart pounding, looking for that one crucial symbol they had agreed upon. He was looking for the Maltese cross. Its presence would have meant they had left under attack, in distress. He scanned every inch of the wood, but there was no cross. The absence of that symbol was the most important message of all. His colonists were alive. His daughter and granddaughter were alive. They had not been slaughtered. They had left of their own free will, heading for a place of safety among friends. The terror of the last few hours evaporated, replaced by a new, urgent mission. He now knew where to look. The answer was just 50 miles away. For John White, the weight of 3 agonizing years had lifted in an instant. The word Croatoan was not a mystery. It was a map. His daughter, his granddaughter, his colonists, they were safe with their ally Manteo. The plan for the next morning was simple. They would make the short sail south, and this nightmare would finally be over. He was a day away from embracing his family. But the North Atlantic in late summer is a fickle beast. As dawn threatened to break, the sky turned a dark, violent shade of purple. The wind began to shriek. Within an hour, a furious storm, a true hurricane, descended upon them. The sea, which had carried him across the ocean, now seemed determined to swallow his ship whole. Mountainous waves crashed over the deck, and the vessel was thrown about like a child's toy. On the storm-lashed deck, the privateer captain faced a terrifyingly simple calculation. This was not a rescue mission for him, it was a business trip. His ship was his life's investment. Then, a sound like a cannon shot echoed over the howling wind. The main anchor cable snapped. The ship, now untethered, began to drift helplessly toward the deadly coastal shoals. Only by cutting their last anchor did they narrowly avoid being smashed to pieces. That was it. The captain made his decision. He would not risk his ship and crew any further for a colony that offered zero profit. You can imagine the scene. John White, a heartbroken old man, pleading and arguing against the wind. But his authority was gone. He was just a passenger. The captain gave the order, and the ship turned its back on Roanoke. It set a course for the lucrative, calmer waters of the West Indies. So close. The Answer and his family were just over the horizon. But a storm and a broken rope had just sealed their fate forever. So, what does Croatoan really mean? For John White, it was a destination he could never reach. For us, it's the beginning of the most logical and most human theory of all. The colonists didn't vanish. They moved. They assimilated. The evidence for this begins with the clue itself. There was no Maltese cross, their prearranged signal for distress. This wasn't a panicked flight from an attack. It was a planned, orderly relocation to the home of their only reliable ally, Montejo. Think about the sheer logistics of this. This was not a small group. We're talking about moving 90 men, 17 women, and 11 children. They had to transport their tools, their salvage supplies, and what little they had left. White's own account notes that the houses were taken down, not destroyed. This suggests a careful, methodical process of packing up their entire world and moving it 50 miles south. It was a monumental act of desperation and trust, a complete surrender to their new reality. The process of assimilation would have been slow and difficult. The English would have had to abandon their language, their customs, and perhaps even their religion to survive. They would learn to hunt, fish, and farm like the Croatoan. Children like Virginia Dare would have grown up knowing only this new life. Her English heritage a distant story told by her parents. They would have intermarried, creating a new, blended community. A story not of a lost colony, but of a found family. For over a century, this remained just a theory. But then in 1709, an English explorer named John Lawson traveled through that same area. He encountered the Hatteras natives, who lived on the very site of the old Croatoan village. Lawson wrote that these people had a remarkable oral tradition. They claimed that some of their ancestors were white people. They even pointed to their gray eyes as proof, a feature unheard of in the purely native population. Lawson's account is a stunning piece of evidence. It suggests the colonists not only survived, but thrived, their lineage literally woven into the fabric of a native tribe. This theory transforms a ghost story into something far more powerful. It becomes a story of resilience, adaptation, and the birth of a new, uniquely American identity, long before America was even a dream. A violent end for the colonists remains a strong theory, perhaps a Spanish raid from their Florida base. This wasn't just about claiming land. It was a decisive projection of power for King Philip II. A swift, brutal strike could have eradicated them. Hostile mainland tribes offer another motive. Ralph Lane's earlier Roanoke colony had significantly angered them. Native groups, scarred by previous English force, would have sought retribution. A coordinated attack might have easily overwhelmed the isolated settlement. A less dramatic, yet equally deadly, scenario is disease. European illnesses, such as smallpox or influenza, could sweep through the colony. Weakened by starvation, the colonists would be incredibly vulnerable. A rapid, silent demise, one by one, is easy to envision. However, these theories face powerful counter-arguments. If massacred, where are the bodies? No graves, bones, or battle signs were found. If the settlement was sacked, why was the site orderly? John White discovered empty buildings, not ruins. Belongings were gone, but no evidence of struggle remained. Even epidemics typically leave human remains. This clean slate, entirely lacking grim evidence, strongly contradicts bloodshed. The archaeological ground shows a conspicuously clean site. This suggests something else entirely for their ultimate fate. 20 years after Roanoke vanished, England established its first permanent colony at Jamestown. Here, tantalizing whispers about the lost settlers began to emerge. Captain John Smith, a key Jamestown figure, diligently gathered intelligence from various native sources. His 1608 map notably marked men clothed living further inland. This suggested some survivors had integrated into indigenous communities, aligning with Chief Powhatan's reports of English-dressed people residing to the south and west. However, these accounts were far from consistent. Powhatan himself relayed a much darker tale. According to William Strachey, Jamestown secretary, Powhatan claimed he had personally slaughtered some Roanoke settlers. This was to prevent them from forging alliances with his enemies. Further complicating the historical picture, the Zuniga map, a Spanish spy map from 1607, showed a European-style fort in the interior near Roanoke. This valuable document hinted at a different fate entirely. These conflicting whispers from Jamestown both illuminate and profoundly deepen the enigma of Roanoke. Did the colonists truly survive and integrate, or did they tragically meet a violent end? The mixed narratives leave us still searching for the full truth of their vanishing. The mystery of Roanoke deepened with conflicting reports, but modern science offered a new direction. In 2012, researchers at the First Colony Foundation analyzed John White's Virginia Pars map. Using infrared imaging, they found something hidden under a small paper patch. This patch, deliberately placed, concealed a symbol for a fort. This rediscovered symbol was located 50 miles inland, at the confluence of the Roanoke and Chowan rivers. This area, now known as Site X near Edenton, North Carolina, quickly became a focal point for archaeologists. The subsequent digs revealed a treasure trove of late 16th century English pottery, mixed seamlessly with native artifacts. Among the finds were fragments of Border, Ware, and North Devon plain baluster jars, everyday items from the period. They even unearthed part of a rapier hilt, a definite sign of European presence. These discoveries suggest a small group of colonists moved inland, perhaps seeking refuge or new alliances. It seems they lived among the indigenous people for a time, blending their cultures. This added an unexpected twist to the tale. The mysterious Croatoan carving pointed to Hatteras Island, a crucial clue demanding investigation. Today, Professor Mark Horton and his Croatoan archaeological project are diligently unearthing answers on this historic land. They have found a significant number of English artifacts from the late 1580s within native village sites. Imagine finding pieces of everyday English life mixed seamlessly with native culture. Among the compelling discoveries are a Nuremberg token, fragments of a rapier handle, and pieces of a slate writing tablet. Most notably, a gold signet ring was unearthed. Experts believe this ring belonged to one of the 1585 colonists, creating a truly personal link to the lost group. These aren't just isolated items. They're English domestic goods found alongside native household items. This pattern suggests not a massacre, but prolonged interaction and perhaps a merging of cultures. This archaeological bounty strongly supports John White's original belief. It provides compelling evidence that at least some of the Roanoke colonists found refuge with the friendly Croatoan people, integrating into their society. It's a powerful and hopeful twist in this enduring mystery. With archaeological discoveries hinting at different paths, modern science offers another tool: genetics. The Lost Colony DNA Project is a remarkable effort to trace the colonists' genetic lineages. This project involves comparing Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA from people who believe they have family links to the original settlers. Researchers aim to match these against known European genetic markers. However, this is no easy task. Obtaining colonial-era DNA for direct comparison proves incredibly difficult. Instead, the project focuses on family surnames associated with the colony. They then analyze the geographic distribution of these surnames. This intricate genetic detective work holds immense promise, yet its challenges are significant. The results, while tantalizing, remain inconclusive for now. The research is ongoing, building a complex genetic tapestry piece by piece. It is a long game, but one that could potentially bridge the 400-year gap. Imagine solving this enduring mystery through the subtle clues hidden within our very own DNA. It is a powerful thought. For centuries, the story of Roanoke was told as a mysterious tragedy of vanishing. Today, however, accumulated evidence points towards a different, more complex story, one of survival. The modern consensus suggests the colony likely split up, a calculated choice for their very existence. Archaeological findings at Site X, revealed by John White's map, indicate one group moved inland. They found refuge, gradually integrating with local tribes. Meanwhile, the main body of colonists likely journeyed to Croatoan Island. Their discoveries of English domestic items mixed with native artifacts strongly suggest they too assimilated into the Croatoan community. This new narrative reframes their disappearance not as a tragic failure, but as an adaptive strategy. Faced with hardship, they chose to join existing native societies. It is plausible that Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America, along with the other settlers, grew up within these indigenous communities. Their survival became part of another culture's history. For centuries, the story of Roanoke was a haunting void. It continues to capture our imagination more than 400 years later, embedded deep within American folklore and popular culture. From plays and books to its status as a foundational myth, Roanoke remains a powerful enigma. You see it reflected in countless tales, always evoking the profound mystery of the wild unknown. The narrative itself has shifted. It is no longer solely a tragedy of vanishing, but a more complex story of survival and cultural assimilation. This evolution, fueled by recent archaeological and genetic evidence, shows us a calculated choice by the colonists. They adapted, integrated, and became part of another culture, rather than simply disappearing. Yet, a definitive answer remains elusive. This lack of a complete resolution allows Roanoke to be a blank canvas for our deepest fears and hopes about the wilderness, colonization, and the unknown. It offers a space to ponder the human experience in the face of insurmountable odds. Roanoke endures as America's most captivating historical puzzle. Perhaps its enduring power comes precisely from its refusal to be fully solved. The mystery itself is the legacy, a ghost story that continues to whisper across the centuries, always asking what truly happened. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into America's oldest mystery, the lost colony of Roanoke. We hope you found this exploration into one of history's most compelling unsolved cases both engaging and thought-provoking. Together, we've journeyed through its puzzling disappearance, meticulously examined the cryptic clues left behind, and investigated the most compelling modern theories of survival and assimilation. Our quest took us from John White's desperate search for his vanished family and settlers to the intriguing whispers heard in the nascent Jamestown colony decades later. We then delved into the fascinating archaeological finds at Site X and Hatteras Island, which are painting a far more complex picture than once imagined. This enduring tale reminds us that history isn't always about definitive, neat answers. Often, it's about carefully interpreting scattered fragments of the past, allowing new evidence to profoundly reshape old narratives. If you found this investigation into what truly happened to those 117 English settlers engaging, please consider giving this video a like. Your support truly helps us bring more captivating historical stories to life. For more unique historical investigations and untold tales, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We appreciate you being with us on this journey through time, and we look forward to sharing more history with you soon.